Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 144 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week, before I begin, I want to give a quick shout out to an anonymous supporter who made a very generous donation to the podcast this past week to help keep it funded for free of ads for you folks at home. And just want to give a thank you to him or / her for their generous donation. And starting next week, I'll be wearing my holiday cap for those who have been asking about that. So starting in December. This week though, I have 6 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. And that includes a review on Civil War, a LitRPG adventure, The Rogue Dungeon book number 2. Also give a review on Changing Faces, new game minus book 1. After that'll be Crota, The Gods Game, volume 1, an epic fantasy LitRPG and GameLit novel. After that, it'll be Irrelevant Jack. And then it'll be First Dungeon, replay book number 2 in that particular series. And then Guild, a LitRPG novella, Monsters, Maces, and Magic, book number 3. So there we go. 6 new LitRPG titles. Before we get into that, I'll go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, going to begin with a quick shout out to Richard Hummel and his novel Radioactive Evolution. This is his first published novel that he had. It came out a couple weeks ago and has been doing for relatively pretty well, actually. It's been consistently over the last 2 weeks in the top 600, and on a couple individual days has been as high as 205 on Amazon's paid store, which is very good if you need a place of reference. It's honestly much harder to me, at least, to be consistent in the top 600 than to just have like a really good one day. So that to me is a little more impressive than like a good day. So the fact that he's done it for 2 weeks, I'm like, yeah, that's a regular influx of new readers who've enjoyed his writing. And even though like we on the podcast gave it a 6 out of 10, it was very close to a 7. And there were just some things that prevented me as enjoyable as it could have. But for a lot of people, that those things don't matter, and those numbers show it. So good for him. Again, it's the author's first novel, so congratulations on him doing well. Good job, man. Okay, also out as some LitRPG news, we have a cover reveal from Aloran Kong this last week. The Land Monsters, Chaos Seed book number 8. So here's that nice cover art that he revealed this past week. Very nice. No release date, folks. Sorry. Don't want to disappoint you. But at least you know what the cover is going to look like, and it looks very primal. So there you go. Okay. Also in some new LitRPG news, we have Daniel Schienhofen, author of the Alpha World series and Apocalypse Gate LitRPG series. He recently did an interview with Nevada Public Radio about his success as an indie author. It's about 10 minutes long. It's a nice little short interview, and it's neat to hear one of our authors do something like this. Got to learn a few things about Daniel Schienhofen that I didn't know. Related to Nevada and family and the novel. So it's kind of a neat little thing. Definitely go check it out. We'll link the show notes for you guys to click on, and you can listen to that particular interview. Last bit of LitRPG news. This one's a bit sadder. George Fisher, longtime member of the LitRPG reader community and a great supporter of many authors, has started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for his wife's cancer treatment. His wife, Blythe, was diagnosed on September 30th, 2018 with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and they're doing everything they can to fight it right now. So if you can give to help pay for any of the treatments, please consider it. If you can't, that's okay. The author asks that you keep his family in mind if you're the praying kind of sort of person. So the podcast definitely donated to that. George Fisher is, again, a big supporter of a lot of literary authors, and he does a lot of like nice reviews for folks. And of course, he's just a member of the community, so we try to support our own. There we go. Okay, on to stuff that is out now. We have Absalom's Trials, came out this week. Also out right now is Limitless Lands book number 2, Conquest, a LitRPG adventure. If you like book 1, you're probably like book 2, but we haven't read it. Didn't really work for me personally, but I know a lot of other people enjoyed the more military-esque kind of LitRPG story. Also out now is Glitch book number 5. That's a short story series. Also out is She Demon, Black Flames Online book number 2. I honestly didn't remember this at all, like that particular series name, and that's because the first book in the series is called The Cursemancer, and that's the title that kind of stuck in my head. So the Black Flame Online thing totally threw me out. So if you read Cursemancer, you liked it, this is, might be for you. I didn't, thought it was a little boring personally, but if you like this series, book 2 is out. There you go. Also out as a second book in this series is Aether Gate Online book number 2, The Blade Guardian. So there you go. Kinds of great stuff. And also out is Rogue Games, a LitRPG adventure. So there you go. Plenty of new things that I haven't touched and read or looked at yet. Have definitely given reviews for anything. So there you go. On to new LitRPG audiobooks. We almost have as many new LitRPG audiobooks this week as we do new LitRPG ebooks. So it's a great week if you're an audiobook lover, including Trojan Afterlife book number 3 that is out now, as is the 6th book in the Alpha World series, Path to Peace. Dragon Seed is also out as an audiobook now. So there we go. Shard's Wraith, which is the 3rd book in the Crystal Shard series. Crystal Shards Online series is out as an audiobook as well. The Kingdom of the Dead NPC's Path book number 2 in that series is out. I believe that's only going to be a 2-book series, if I'm not mistaken, according to the translators. So there we go. It's already kind of completed. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, those are all your LitRPG audiobooks. Now on to upcoming LitRPG. This is just a list of stuff that's coming out in the near future, folks, before we skip it, but we have a couple new editions. Eden's Gate will be out in just another couple days. On November the 30th, it's the 5th book in that series, The Omen. The 3rd book in the 20-sided Eye series will be out on November the 30th as well. On December the 1st, it'll be Cultivating Chaos, the Veil of Verse, Cultivating Chaos, book number 1, which is a collaboration between William Moran and Blaze Corbin. Also out on the 1st of December is going to be Daniel Shinofin's Apocalypse Gates, book number 3, Gearing Up. So that'll be out there as well. Citadel of Smoke, which is going to be the 4th book in the Stonehaven League series, will be out on December the 4th. Level Up, book number 2, will be out on December the 10th. The Rise of Resurgence book number 3, called Redemption, will be out on December the 14th. Winter Dungeonland will be out on December the 16th. That's the 3rd book in that particular series. The 3rd book in the Good Guys series, called Dungeon Mauling, will be out on December the 19th. On December the 27th, it'll be the 4th book in the Dark Herbalist series. On January the 1st, it'll be Break Evo Born, book number 1. It's a new addition to the list. Just happened to see it this week. Out on January the 9th, it'll be Level Up the Knockout, which is a in the same Level Up universe, but it is a different main character, so be aware of that. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And we're going to begin with our review of Civil War, a little bit adventure, The Rogue Dungeon, book number 2, written by James A. Hunter and Eden Hudson. It is 238 pages, $4.89. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Build, evolve, conquer. Welcome to the Civil War. Roark von Graf, former noble and hedge mage, currently mid-level mob in an MMORPG, has his sights set on taking down the tyrannical dungeon lord. But the reigning troll despot is nearly as devious as Roark, and his followers are much higher level. With forever death on the line, civil war breaks out in the Citadel, pitting Roark's new regime against Asbek's horde of loyalists. To survive, Roark will have to outfox the dungeon lord, forge new, dirtier weapons, and shady alliances, and above all, evolve. But while the trolls are entrenched in their civil war, an outside threat is growing. Eyes from the IRL world are beginning to turn toward the Citadel. There's something strange about this Roark, and they intend to find out what. And actually, that's a really good summary of like what the novel is about, to be honest. I enjoyed book 1 in the series, I did, but book 2 is even better. And I think that's always a great thing to do. It's very rare for a second book to even better as the first, if you enjoyed it. The authors, plural, have really improved upon making the RPG world feel more like an MMO. They've incorporated a few new points of views, and I think that really does add an extra level of complexity. They include a couple of point of views, including outside of the game point of views for the gamers, for some of the players, and for the game company itself. So I think, again, it adds a nice layer of complexity and amps up the MMO aspect. I think that's one of the weaker points in book one was that, it didn't really always feel like an MMO, even though like there were some players coming through. Most of the time was spent with the main character, and he's like transported from a fantasy world. And it sometimes felt a little more, encapsulated in the dungeon itself. So, but this one definitely expands, and you get to see a little more more gamers talk, more gamer point of views, especially the game company. It definitely gives this world like more of an MMO vibes, which is definitely an improvement for me. The other aspects I like from book one, they're also here. Fast-paced action, RPG monster evolutions, crafting. There's additionally some kingdom building aspects that are incorporated this time around as the main character tries to form alliances with other dungeon level bosses, bringing in like outside resources, like NPC resources from the community, crafting, and it's all around good stuff. So I really actually enjoy this one again a little bit more than I did book one. It gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. From me, I had a good time with it. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review. It'll be, that's 7.7 out of 10 for Civil War Liberty Adventure Rogue Dungeon book number 2. Some people want me to say that, so there you go. Second review is going to be for Changing Faces, New Game Minus book number 1, written by Sarah Lynn. It is 366 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Bloodwraith thought of himself as an effective villain until a single adventurer destroyed his entire lair. With his last breath, he switched bodies with the adventurer and discovered that his world was built on lies. Alien beings from another dimension were using his world as a game, and now he was one of them. The problem is, Bloodwraith has no experience being an adventurer. He was a mage, and this new body is only good at hitting things. He relied on undead minions, but now he has no choice but to depend on other people. And worst of all, strange boxes are constantly appearing in his vision, describing the world in unfamiliar, nonsensical terms. Taking over the world is off the table because the alien gods might be watching. To survive, Bloodwraith will need to learn the truth about himself and this world. And that means acting like an adventurer, at least for now. Okay, so there you go. The premise is that the NPC villain body swapped with a player and then got reset. So he's starting over at level 1. Now, only from the villain's perspective. Only the story is told from the villain's perspective. It was a much more of a fantasy magic spell that he cast at the last minute before his lich body was going to be destroyed. The novel goes through the entire noob experience of learning about RPG game mechanics, but it's all from the perspective of this fantasy villain who thinks of it in his cultural terms. I actually like that part the best about the story, in seeing like an MMORPG world, but from the point of view of a fantasy villain character who's describing kind of all these like boxes that he sees, like blue boxes, like, oh, these are magical messages from the box gods, and they're trying to influence him. Or like he'll see like the reputation changes. Oh, these box gods are changing the personalities of people in my world, and that's not really far off. He sees like gaining experience points and levels from his enemies. I was like, oh, it's like a necromantic power, where you're like stealing the soul energy from these creatures and making yourself stronger. So it's like a really interesting kind of lens to see like a fairly familiar like LitRPG slice of life adventuring kind of stuff through. So I actually like that part the best about the story, and that's kind of what I enjoyed the most. There is another aspect in the villain aspect, in that the main character is constantly fighting with his body's inclination to do good versus his pragmatic evil point of view to do things like murdering the quest giver, and stealing everything, or poisoning a whole town for the experience points. And I like that aspect. It wasn't as well developed as I was hoping it was going to be. The novel ultimately chooses to not pursue like the villain's story path in the novel, which is like, oh, okay, that's a little disappointing, but it doesn't like mess up the story. It's still entertaining to see like a regular, essentially slice of life action adventure story through this really interesting lens. The game mechanics in the story are solid. They're consistent, fairly standard D&D style stuff, with leveling giving like 5 stat points and various skills that can be learned and improved through use or practice. The main character is never really overpowered, and when faced with tough odds, the author never breaks the game rules to establish the game. I actually always like, in other words, the author establishes game rules and he follows them. So, or she follows them in this case, sorry. So good job, Sarah Lynn. Overall, had a good time with the story, though I'll admit most of the stuff that happens is, again, familiar slice of life story adventuring. Again, it's told through a unique lens that gives it a fresh feel. Again, only disappointed that the story didn't advance that villain approach. It's a choice. It's not good or bad, but for me, it's like, oh, I think I would have liked it even more. It probably would have gotten like an 8 out of 10 for me if that had been the story path, because I think that would have been like just added some extra unique, interesting story types for me, but it didn't. So it's not a bad story. Again, I really had a good time with it still. Good RPG mechanics, and it's a very nice story twist. So for me, it gets a score of 7.8 out of 10. For Changing Faces, new game minus book, almost an 8. Didn't quite make it because, again, the decisions to take the story more in the heroic version was like, oh, okay, that just felt more familiar. That had it taken like the villain path, I think that would have been much more interesting narrative choice. But again, still very interesting. 7.8 out of 10, which is the highest score of the entire episode. That's 7.8 out of 10 for Changing Faces, new game minus book number 1. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review, Crota, the God Game Volume 1, an epic fantasy LitRPG and GameLit novel written by Ramon Mejia. It is 223 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. A game played between gods, where the playing field is the world itself, and the pieces living beings. A young man caught unwittingly between, in a strange world without allies or help, must battle for survival using his wits and magic alone. Pawn or player, his fate is his to decide. Which will he prove to be? Accidentally summoned from Earth to a world of melee, Karen becomes embroiled in a 1,000-year war between the gods. Through no fault of his own, Karen earns their ire and is trapped in Crota, an abandoned city haunted by undead and infested with all manner of beasts and monsters. To escape the gods' trap, Karen must become a player that even the gods would learn to fear. Okay, so that last part's a little bit more of a series kind of concept. Just a minor note on this. There are some minor formatting issues that have been noted by myself and by other reviewers. There's a persistent gray background, and sometimes heavily shrunken tables, depending on the device you're reading this on. The author has said that he's fixed it, but the corrections may or may not have been pushed to everyone. Amazon's worried about that kind of stuff. But I think everybody who purchases it on a new basis probably gets the better version format, but I got the original one, so those corrections didn't seem to update yet. But hopefully if you get the new version or you purchase it after this has been aired, you should get the good version, or the one without those issues. Okay, overall, this is a pretty good slice of life story about a guy who's accidentally summoned to an RPG game world to partake in a game with some trapped gods. At least that last part doesn't really come into play in this particular book 1 in this series, but it's more of like a series concept. Like, oh, I can see where the author's like heading in book 2, book 3, book 4, where like as the main character advances, he'll be pitted against other, like, I don't want to say champions, but like other players who represent these gods and stuff, and they'll have those conflicts. But none of that really happens here in this particular book. In this particular novel, it's mostly about how the main character survives in this new hostile world, figures out how best to use his RPG powers and the progression system and his levels. And he's dropped in this hostile territory. He starts at level 1, but he has to figure out how to beat monsters who are level 7 and higher. So it's very much like this kind of survival-ish kind of concept where has overwhelming odds and he has to figure out how to use his game powers to overcome them. The game mechanics in the store are pretty detailed, and there are lots of notifications, character sheets, spell descriptions, item descriptions, and loads of information about the game mechanics, which is definitely a plus for me. Even more important, the author does a really good job of describing the main character's reasoning for choosing one power over another, and that gives some really good insight into his gaming choices and preferred playstyle. So that's always a nice thing for me. Not just like the action adventure, but you get an insight into the main character's gaming mindset, because that's one of those things, all gamers all do. They all have preferences, they have like their own logic and reasoning, and it's a nice character insight, at least to me. The only real minor complaints about how the story is it kind of takes a really long time to get into the game world. The main character doesn't get there till like the 30% mark, which is like a third of the way through the story. And everything prior to that is either setting up the premise, which it honestly takes too long, or details about character, which is fine, except a lot of those details don't come into play later. So it's kind of an interesting balance there. It's might bug people. For me, it's just like, oh, okay, just got to kind of get through it. The second point that kind of bothered me is that the author introduces a lot of characters in like these cutaway scenes in between chapters with the main character. And most of those characters are never seen again in the book 1. Like they're probably going to be developed for book 2 or 3 or whatever. But it's like, oh, you're choosing a bunch of interesting characters, including like character descriptions, background motivations, maybe even like relationships, and like never hear from them again in this story. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's That's a choice. I'm probably not going to remember those people in book 2 or 3, but at least you did some setup. And that's kind of it. Minor annoyances at best. Overall, it's a fun slice of life story about a guy dropped into an RPG world and seeing how he survives. And that's good enough for me. It's definitely entertaining. It gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's Crota, the God Game, volume number 1, with an epic fantasy LitRPG and GameLit novel with a score of 7.4 out of 10. There you go. Okay, next, Irrelevant Jack, written by Prax Venter. It is 316 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Jack is violently pulled into a game-like universe and dumped into a seaside town on the brink of destruction. When the people of Blackmore Cove begin to ask about his combat role, Jack discovers his odd hero class and finds that parts of his game interface are riddled with exposed coding errors. He quickly learns that the only way the town can grow and push back the unknown substance threatening to consume it is if brave heroes venture into an infinitely high, ever-changing tower, kill bizarre monsters for their valuable equipment drops, and then deposit those items into a specialist chest. As Jack struggles to level up and save the people he has grown to care for, he learns the true nature of this simulated world and his destiny. But can he overcome his reckless nature and become the leader this strange world needs? So there we go. That's the author's description and fairly accurate. This is an entertaining tower crawl, which if you don't know what that is, it's a dungeon crawl in a tower. So instead of like someone like getting into dungeon and going down levels and levels and levels, as it goes down levels, it gets harder. It just does the opposite direction. It goes up. So the first level is the easiest, and it goes level 2 is harder, 3 harder, 4, etc. And in this particular case, I think the towers, they're supposed to have an infinite number, but they seem to max out at 11 according to like other mechanics in the story, and it's a slight contradiction, but still, it's essentially a dungeon dive in reverse. So if you like dungeon dives, you like dungeon crawls, you're probably going to like this. There are some sci-fi subplots. Honestly, a lot of the plot part of the story is kind of a convoluted and it's contradictory, and there are some big plot holes in it. If you think about it too much, if you just think of this as an excuse, that's an excuse to dungeon dive and get monsters and get new gear, I think you'll enjoy this more in that respect. Game mechanic wise, the story tries to be a little different. In the way that it describes progression, it takes out the experience points in this particular case in the progression system, and instead bases the main character's level solely on clearing levels in the tower. So when the main character beats level 2, he's now level 3. He gets upgrades to his HP, his mana. He gets to use level 3 gear and below. And so progression is not tied directly to killing monsters. So no matter how many monsters he kills in the level, he's not going to gain any experience. He might get better loot. He might get better items that he can later use in other game mechanics like feeding the town to like make it stronger and to give it progress in that respect. He himself won't necessarily get stronger unless he's getting new loot, of course. The main character's stats are increased by items, basically. So a lot of the powers also comes from items. So him getting a new sword, some new gear is kind of the main way that he's also progressing. But again, it's like I said, a little different than your general kill monster, get XP, get levels. And that you would think that particular aspect of it would change the way that the main character acts or plays from like just monster grinding. It doesn't, and that's kind of one of the small points that, like, even though the game mechanics try to make this different, the main character's behavior is still very grindy. And I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't seem like it needed to be the case. Like, there are different alternatives to playing or adventuring in this case that would have made more sense, even from even from within the story's context. Again, plot holes that I'm like, oh, okay, that bugs me. But if you look at it as just like a dungeon dive, none of that story stuff really matters too much, and it's just an excuse to adventure, kill monsters, and that's what I'm choosing to think of this as, because it's more enjoyable to me. The storyline, again, is a little convoluted. It comes down to clearing tower levels and feeding items to the RPG town to help it grow, so it's not overcome by this vaguely defined corruption, malevolent force. And again, there are bigger sci-fi impacts on the universe for defeating these monsters too, but again, it's really just an excuse to kill stuff, and that's fine. There are some character development subplots which include like a minor romance. The romance was a little forced, and there were some big plot holes again in the story. If you look too hard, again, look at that as a slice of life dungeon crawl, and it's entertaining just enough to be good, at least for me. For me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10 for Relevant Jack. And again, 7.1 is like barely, it's like really on the borderline, like this doesn't work, or this does work. And it came down to me like, oh, it's entertaining enough if I think of this in this context of the story. If I just think of it as like a dungeon crawl and I enjoy the action and adventures and I ignore some of the plot holes, I'm like, oh, that's fine. It's entertaining enough for me. So 7.1 out of 10 for a relevant deck. There you go. Okay, next. First Dungeon, written by John Cunningham. It is a short story. It's 78 pages. It is $1. Pretty good price. And it's also available on Kindle Unlimited. So there you go. Here's the author's description. Lana's life has gone from bad to worse ever since waking up with no memories in a strange land with Peter. From the very start, Peter had to be saved from one situation after another. In fact, if it hadn't been for their mysterious new ally Frost, both would probably be dead by now. Even being rescued by a stranger isn't enough to make Lana trust anyone. Not the shady Wilshire agent they contract as an outfitter for a dungeon, not the gorgeous defender with the big lion shield that takes a fancy to her, and certainly not Frost, who seems to have more secrets than answers. Things are almost looking up with Lana and her party complete the dungeon and finally have some coin in their purse. That goes suddenly sour when they're caught in a house valor trap meant for their illegal agent who vanishes, leaving them in the lurch. Not knowing that they've captured the first true heroes in decades gives them time as Housefuller mounts a search for the elusive agent, but it's only a matter of time before the Valor Warriors discover the prize they really are. Against the clock, who will the trio be able to work together to free themselves and escape, or is their adventure going to be cut short? Find out. There you go. And that's honestly that's the entire plot of the novel. It really is. The author spoils the whole thing. So there you go. It's a short story. The second book in this serial, honestly, is a disappointment. I read book 1 and I'm like, this doesn't really work for me. But I'll give the second book a chance, and book 2 is worse. It's not like it's worse in the respect that there are fewer RPG mechanics showing. In book 1, book 1 is the description of like where you're getting set up, where the main characters are transferred to the game world. They go through their creation phase of like their characters and stuff, set up their powers, their classes, and they go to like this beginning dungeon thing, right? In book 2, that's gone. So they're already here in this world. They're exploring a little bit, and you just get less RPG stuff, which is like a huge disappointment because I was hoping for the opposite. I was hoping for more. Additionally, in book 1, the main look at the characters are a couple like inserted graphic pictures where you got to see the character sheet, the character's picture, and of course like the whole stats thing and their skills and all that good stuff, and of course the levels and how that changes. In the book 2, that's gone as well. Any mention of character sheets and those pictures are gone. And I understand why the author did it, because it's technically expensive to add those pictures. Like Amazon charges you a delivery fee for an author for your book to anyone who purchases it, and pictures add a lot of cost to that. So I understand at 7-8 pages for $1 that you don't want to add extra expenses for every purchase because you make almost no money. But that was also the main source of like those RPG stats, and it wasn't replaced by something like, a table, or like even just like regular text showing that information. So you lose a good chunk of the RPG-ness of book 1 or the series, and that's kind of what I come for, to be honest. The story-wise, it was just kind of boring. I mean, it really was. The characters are still very childlike, which is a complaint for me from book 1, both in their dialogue and in their behaviors. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing in of itself. It's just that it didn't appeal to me personally. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it didn't improve. So I'm like, okay, that's still not a plus for me. There's not a lot of comment in the story either, so that doesn't make up for it. And overall, the story is just like, they face a puzzle dungeon and some guild opposition, and it just really wasn't engaging to read with, for me at least. So for me, it gets to score a 5 out of 10. Still, I guess, technical LitRPG. But again, it was not entertaining. 5 out of 10 for me. That's the first dungeon. We play book number 2. I'm not going to read book number 3. So there you go. Okay, last review is going to be another short story called The Guild, a LitRPG novella from the Monsters, Maces, and Magic book series, written by Terry W. Irvin II. Okay, it is 94 pages, 99 cents, and it's not available on Kindle Unlimited. So there you go. I actually think it's a really good price point, actually, for the price, for the page count. There you go, and here's the author's description. You can't hide in an RPG forever. 18 years ago, Tom, a Barber College student, got trapped in the Monsters, Maces, and Magic game world as Josiah the Thief. The first 2 adventures saw all of Tom's party members, also trapped within the game world, perish within the fetid depths of the Dark Heart Swamp. His subsequent stint adventuring with NPCs proved short-lived. He preferred survival. Over time, Tom became Josiah, adopting a life blending in with the game world's NPCs. He gave up adventuring as a thief, trained as a lay healer, and works as a barber cutting hair, pulling teeth, lancing boils, and functioning as a low-level operative within the local thieves guild. But life, even when lived as a faux NPC, can get interesting. Such happens when a young half-goblin thief named Gurk shows up in Josiah's shop looking for information. Little did the pair know that the unobtrusive barbershop would become a focal point in a brewing guild war. And that's actually a really good description into the opening, even 10%. That's gives you enough of a tease, so really good novel description in my opinion. This is a short story and a side story in the Monster Maces and Magic series. The author does a really good job of efficiently setting up the story in the first 10% of the novel. You get enough background information to care about the main character, good details that make the world feel full. And I'm going to be honest, I was super impressed by the first 10% of this, more on the writer side of things, because I'm I couldn't do that. Genuinely the first 10% of this, which is only 8 or 9 pages, the author does a really great job of setting up the character, his background, all the stuff talked about in the novel description, plus a lot of better information, but also just describing the thiefish world and the surroundings, and I was super impressed by how efficient that description was. I remember thinking the same thing about the series in general. I was the author does a really good job of being efficient in descriptions and creating character development in a really short period of time. So kudos to him for that on the writing side. The story itself has good action, ties nicely to the main series with that group being a larger part of the story than I thought they were going to be. Overall, it's a little lighter on the RPG stuff because it's assuming that you've read or at least familiar with some of the stuff from the main series. But even if you're not, this is a great standalone story. If you want an introduction to the series, this will definitely do it for you. It's definitely light enough if you're more fantasy oriented. You're not going to miss the art, the ton of notifications that don't exist here. And instead, remember that this series is transported into a tabletop game kind of story world. And that's where that comes in. But again, very entertaining, had a good time with it, and again, definitely impressed with the author's ability to do a really amazing job of setting up the story in the first 10% super efficiently. So it gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. Guild, the LitRPG novella, Monster Maces and Magic book number 3, with a score of 7.6 out of 10. I mean, it's a short story, I can't spoil things for you, but it is highly entertaining. Definitely recommend if you got an extra buck lying around. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, for watching the show. If you want to follow us anywhere, we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. We got a website. We have links in the show notes if you guys want to check that out, of course. Plus the links to other LitRPG Facebook groups where authors and readers mingle and we talk and we hang out, and every day is a good time about this genre that I do all love. And of course, if you want to enjoy the podcast and you want to help support us, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, thanks for hanging out with me today, ladies and gentlemen. Until we can hang out again. Remember, folks, to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.